Putin, according to the Wall Street Journal, is betting that Ukraine's army will collapse before his economy does. That is why he keeps avoiding President Trump's push for a peace deal. He believes time is on his side. At the same time, Putin has launched one of the biggest airstrikes since 2022, killing again a mother and a child in Kyiv, also targeting parliamentary building. Russia continues its war against civilians, has already lost over 1 million soldiers, and seems to be preparing new offensives. Joining me now is Paul Lewandowski, a former war veteran. Paul, it's always a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So the General Staff reported over 1,088,000 Russian military losses since the start of the full-scale invasion. For modern Russia, 1.1 million losses is unprecedented if to compare with the past wars. Do you see signs that the army is demoralized, and do casualty figures, real or reported, have the power to influence Russian society or its leadership?
Sure. Vladimir Putin has worked pretty tirelessly to build a system of recruiting, training, and then deploying soldiers that insulates the people in power in Russia from any of the real consequences of the war. That's actually been pretty central. So that's why he recruits in rural areas, higher rates of poverty, often linguistic or ethnic minorities. These are people in regions and from families that have almost no political or economic power in Russia. It's one of the reasons why the robust salaries that Russia offers them are so attractive. But it also has the side effect of sort of outsourcing the war in a way away from the Russian public that can influence a dictator like Vladimir Putin. Those are going to be Russians located in places like St. Petersburg or Moscow, Russians that own businesses. If the war touches them, then that's Putin's worst case scenario. So the losses are so far seem to be insulated from the public, from at least that segment of the public, in a emotional sense. But the problem that these Russian oligarchs are starting to run into is that these aren't just 1 million Russians selected at random. They're military-aged men, and they're physically able-bodied. These are Russians who should have been working in the Russian mines, in the oil and gas industry, in Russian agriculture, and that isn't happening. And so you're seeing more and more reports of the Russian economy being desperate, not for soldiers, though they're certainly desperate for that too, but for able-bodied workers able to continue to run these industries. And every major Russian industry is paying more and more for workers, and it has fewer and fewer places to sell their goods and services to.
Yeah, but why they are struggling with a not enough number of people to work there? Because for such a huge country, what is that, 1 million people?
Yeah, I mean, I think Russia has, 50 to 100 million. But you have to remember that prior to this war, Russia already had a demographic crisis. And that meant that it was an aging country, one of actually the oldest in Europe in terms of the lack of new births. And this is also the Russian men particularly have a very low life expectancy relative to, again, peer countries in Europe. I believe the last time I looked, it was around 65 years old. Right? By comparison, the life expectancy of a man in, say, France or Germany is closer to 80. And so for the Russian public, right, particularly, again, industries that employ a lot of men, agriculture, oil and gas, even a lot of like heavy equipment, manufacturing, mining. These are essential industries for the Russian economy and for the Russian oligarch class. And so it's not so much that they can't find women or younger workers to do the job, though there is a shortage of that. It's primarily hitting these industries that, again, would otherwise be drawing from this particular demographic population, right? Healthy men who aren't right so old that they can no longer work, or so young that they are in school or abroad.
Yeah, abroad, run away, or also, preparing to go to the army. Yes, and absolutely, you're right. On the night of September 7, Russia carried out its largest airstrike since 2022, using more than 800 drones and 13 missiles. And when I was falling asleep, we're always as Ukrainians checking the phone, and I'm like, there was a message and at the Telegram that Russia will launch almost 900 drones, and I'm like, okay, this night will be kind of fun. So Ukraine's air defense stopped most of them, but civilians still were killed, and including 1 year baby. So basically, can Ukraine's defense keep up with Russia's growing drone and missile production? Because from what I've seen and what I see right now, they're going to keep going to do the same attacks every time, and probably with a bigger amount of drones.
So that's a tough question to really draw an answer to, because it's less of a static problem and more of a cat and mouse game between the air defense technologies and Russian Shaheds, which, as we've seen, have improved considerably, right? I've seen video of Shaheds with would appear to be kind of AI onboard guidance systems that can actually take evasive action. I've seen them trying to evade air defense drones. And so what you have, again, is this arms race between new air defense technologies that can efficiently take out Russian strike drones, and then Russian strike drones and the Russians are constantly also trying to innovate and find ways to sort of get around air defense systems. And so you're seeing, the biggest Ukrainian advantage in this is they have a very robust defense technology industry. They have an excellent process for getting new technologies developed and scaled and onto the battlefield very rapidly. And the biggest sort of competition is between Ukraine, who has the backing of a lot of Western engineering firms, a lot of Western companies that want to experiment essentially with these new technologies. They will offer them to Ukraine or assist Ukraine in developing their own homemade versions of them and to get them to the field. And Russia doesn't have this quite as much. There's some evidence that China may be doing some light version of this, providing some level of technological support to Russia, but it's not clear that it is occurring at the same scale as you're seeing in terms of the relationship between Western tech companies and Ukrainian defense tech development.
Yeah, you mentioned AI-powered drone. And do we have them in Ukraine?
That I can't speak to. If you asked me to place a bet, I would bet they're out there being field tested at some scale. But anything definitive would never be shared with me. Yeah.
I just saw the article. But do they need a specific, very strong software?
So the general principle that these seem to be operating on, at least for Ukrainian strike drones, and the most common deployment package that I've heard talked about, is to beat Russian jamming in a affordable way. And so obviously fiber optic drones, very capable of doing that. Fiber optic spools now are much lighter and much cheaper than they were even 12 months ago. But if the Ukrainian armed forces can find a way to get even a small AI GPU, a little AI brain, for lack of a better term, onto a drone with a camera, what they would really only need to do is train the drone to execute the last, I'm going to say 200 meters or so of a strike, because that's where Russian jammers are going to be most effective. And that's one of the reasons I suspect that we've seen programs within the armed forces where they will offer incentives for units to actually record their successful strikes on Russian targets and upload them. The idea is to build a library of training data of what a successful strike looks like, so the AI software can then learn, hey, this is how a successful FPV drone strike against a tank or infantry, this is what it looks like. And once you have that software, it's easy to put it into every one of these AI brains and then deploy it in these strike drones.
You know, I was watching the video from China, how these drones are working together. Also was watching how the Taiwan drones are working. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the name of it, wait a second, Hellscape. Have you heard about them?
I haven't.
Okay. Well, it's so the thing is, I was watching, like, they have a main drone, as you're saying, like the head of everyone, and the little drones, I don't know, the kids, they are just following him, and their main task, not to be targeted with anything, not to be collapsed, reach the point and everything. So it sounds like super scary, to be honest. If we have that on the front line, I don't know, from the Russian side, that sounds very scary. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm always skeptical of flashy new technologies, because both Russia and China are notorious for fielding prototype versions of technology that they are unable to scale and oftentimes are based on fraud entirely. For example, Russia claimed years and years ago to have a stealth fighter on par with the US's F-22 or F-35. Well, after 4+ years of Russian combat deployments, the stealth fighter is nowhere to be found. And the answer is clearly that it's technology that maybe the Russians were able to sort of cobble together a single prototype or 2 or 3 prototypes, but they never had the ability to maintain it, to actually fly it under combat conditions. The Chinese have done the same thing with what they call a 6th-generation stealth fighter. They released some grainy footage and kind of were like, wow, this could be a 6th-generation stealth fighter. Who knows? But if you have it, you demonstrate it. And you demonstrate it in a way that leaves no room for ambiguity. So when I see these kind of technologies, and that's not to say that they do get developed and scaled out and fielded to the battlefield, but for every one time that happens for countries like Russia and China, there's at least 3 or 4 examples of technologies that are never really ready for prime time, never really going to make it in battlefield conditions, not really scalable, and are just sort of propaganda and intimidation.
Oh, thank you for that. That's kind of, calming me down. Yeah. So, Paul, Putin believes, as I said earlier, that Ukraine's army will wear out before Russia's economy. How realistic is that calculation?
Again, I'm not party to this specific math behind, Ukraine's recruitment numbers, Russia's recruitment numbers. But what I think is significant is that it's less about collapsing the Russian economy and more, again, about putting pressure on those aspects of Russian society that Putin has to appease. Because every dictators, there are very few absolute dictators who truly have the total loyalty and command of everyone around them. In general, they almost sit atop an unstable pyramid, and it's those people immediately under them that support them that these dictators have to appease. Again, think of any dictator's inner circle. And so the idea is less about collapsing the Russian economy in kind of a wholesale way and more creating an environment where a critical number of Russian oligarchs or siloviki get together and say, guys, we can't continue to operate this way. And once that critical mass gets together, then you may start to see either Putin get threats to his leadership that could be literal in a dramatic sort of dictator deposed and replaced sense, but could even be less dramatic in a sense of Putin remains in power as a figurehead, but decisions begin to be made without his input. And decisions are made, again, and he is coerced to go along. So I think that is a scenario that is much closer than people realize. Again, if I'm not party to the Ukrainian recruitment numbers, I'm definitely not party to the inner workings of Putin's oligarchs and Siloviki. But been a trend within Russia, at least two cases that I can think of recently in the last maybe 60 or 90 days, where high-level Russian generals, high-level Russian officials are essentially imprisoned, stripped of their wealth and titles, and in some cases even their families are charged and stripped of their possessions as part of a campaign of what is effectively coercion, right? And it seems like Putin is more and more signaling, hey, I can't just offer you carrots, right? Opportunities to enrich yourself and your family, but increasingly he's relying on sticks, which is threats and coercion. But in terms of building a stable system, coercion doesn't work as well, especially trying to coerce billionaires and senior military officials. They're not exactly known as being an easily coerced group of people.
Yeah, I see. Well, the next question, Paul, I kind of can predict your answer, but still, could the it's not that new, coalition of the willing security guarantees really change the balance on the battlefield?
I don't think so, because even they admit that the best they can talk about fielding is a peacekeeping force. And again, the European militaries or Western European militaries have just had so much their ability to produce their own weapon systems and field a military capable of actually checking a state like Russia is very, very limited. We're talking about militaries with less than 100,000 soldiers on active duty and often a almost complete dependence on U.S. Resources for things, again, like air superiority, logistics, intelligence. So I'm always part of the security guarantee package is the idea that when you deploy a small forward force, that the thing that stops, in this case, Russia from annihilating that force of, let's use German troops as an example. The idea is that Putin isn't going to annihilate this small contingent of German troops because he fears a fully mobilized German military that would respond. And if there isn't actually a fully mobilized or a fully mobilizable military, then it's unclear what that security guarantee ensures. Again, in the case of the United States, there is a huge military that backs up every U.S. troop who's deployed essentially anywhere in the globe. But again, the security guarantee or the peacekeeping force or the reassurance force or whatever term the Europeans want to use for it, it's only as effective as the military might that backs it up. And the Europeans right now and for the foreseeable future don't really have that backup.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, they don't have that much experience at the Ukrainian army. That's one thing. But the key word in this peacekeeping mission, it's peace. And we're so far away from that. I mean, there is I cannot see any light at the end of this tunnel. So I'm not trying to be pessimistic, rather just realistic. So yeah, you're right. I mean, no. But when former foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba, he just recently wrote a very interesting article that security guarantees are, we don't need them, basically. That's our electoral nightmare for European politicians. And instead, he calls for massive weapons deliveries, stronger air defense, EU integration, and legal backing for strikes inside Russia. So, yeah.
Yeah, again, I think that's a much more realistic scenario and much more electorally palatable, as you point out, for Western Europe. Again, a lot of these Western European countries are actually in need of greater economic stimulus. And certainly it's true in the United States. We've seen that when we have economic slowdowns, oftentimes defense spending can juice an economy that's slowing down. So a country like Germany might electorally struggle to agree to provide actual uniformed troops that might not even be that helpful, but they might be much happier to see an industry like their defense industry with companies like Rheinmetall suddenly get government orders for billions and billions of dollars in revenue. That can really be the difference between an economy in recession and economy that is humming along. As Vladimir Putin has proved, right? Just the thing that let him grow his economy through this massive sanction regime, at least for the first 3 years of the war, was government spending on defense. So I think that sort of scenario is something that the Europeans would be much more amenable to, which would be much more mutually beneficial, at least from their perspective.
Actually, yeah, American president's supposed to announce something today or tomorrow about sanctions, right?
I put so little weight in the statements of the White House. It's very, very difficult for, it could be nothing. It could be game changing. It could sound game changing and then get walked back tomorrow. We're on our 15th two week or else deadline with the White House. So I think, I wouldn't put it on your calendar as an event.
Okay. Yes. So I know that the U.S. has not yet defined its role in these guarantees that Europeans are talking about. But could you imagine, Paul, if there will be not the American volunteers that we have few thousands here in Ukraine in international battalions or ZSU, but I mean, if they will be officially presented, could you imagine there will be a game changer? The war will stop in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think it wouldn't even take American boots on the ground. Again, I think the most telling event was, to me, when Israel launched strikes against the Iranian government, right, and Iran in Tehran. And remember, the Iranian air defenses were purchased and engineered by Russia. This was a core part of their cooperation. Russian military went into Iran and helped them set up and organize their air defenses, and essentially sold to the Iranians, hey, our air defenses beat this NATO-trained, NATO-equipped Ukrainian military. And the Israelis that were armed, again, with F-35s and the true top-of-the-line U.S. systems just cut through the Iranian air defenses. Absolutely offered no resistance. Israel lost 0 aircraft. So to me, American troops on the ground would almost be unnecessary, given the fact that just offering complete air dominance, the ability to strike, even if the U.S. was to say we won't strike in Russian sovereign territory, only in occupied Ukraine, you're still talking about just complete helplessness by the Russian military in the face of it. It's really, again, the evidence was clear that there is still, air power can still be extremely decisive when you have technology that can beat air defenses.
Yeah, that's a very good point. But, Paul, some say Ukraine is stuck in a bad deal after signing a minerals agreement with the U.S. while, getting little new military aid. So do you agree that it's kind of an unfair exchange? For sure. Sitting down, forcing Ukraine or coercing Ukraine into this sort of minerals agreement that the U.S. billed as being, Scott Bessent went out and said it was just as good as a security guarantee. But I think the actual text of the agreement, it really leaves a lot that still needs to be hammered out. There's a lot of the text that says, this aspect or that aspect will be determined later. And in the U.S., the president, major agreements and treaties still have to be ratified by Congress. And, as I believe is the case still in Ukraine. So I'm skeptical that these kind of agreements can't be walked back. Yes, it is a bad deal. Do I think the deal will be executed over the next 10 years? Probably not. It's pretty unlikely. I see. Paul, I was watching your videos that were published a year ago, and you were surfing and scrolling Russian soldiers' comments, and they were writing that Ukrainian drones in the forest on the front line were like mosquitoes in the forest. Yeah, that was a precise quote. From your perspective, has Russia? We're just going back to the beginning, but still, has Russia now managed to close that gap?
It seems like Russia definitely has. They've definitely learned the lessons, but I think there's a fundamental conundrum that Russia faces that Ukraine doesn't, which is that Russia's strategy is being on the offense. And ultimately, Russian troops have to come out of prepared positions. They have to advance. They have to cross fields. They have to cross roads. And that presents opportunities, additional opportunities for strikes that Ukraine doesn't have. Now, obviously, Russia seems to be able to produce more drones. It seems to be able to produce drones at least at parity with what Ukraine can produce. But ultimately, Ukrainian soldiers still can exploit the fact that Russian soldiers have to advance in ways that Ukraine doesn't. And again, both sides are absolutely trying to tear each other's logistics and resupply routes, absolutely trying to tear them apart with these drones. But again, it's much harder for Russia because they have to advance into a new position and then build a logistics line to support that position, all of which explains a large part of the difference in casualties that are reported between Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because it's kind of a nightmare. Ukrainians cannot even harvest because Russian drones just killing Ukrainian farmers while they're just working. People I know from my friends, they cannot go to the funerals because Russian drones in Kherson region, they're just attacking, following them at the funerals. So it's disaster.
Yeah, the Russia, it just feels like Russia really is increasingly just dropping their mask and saying, hey, we don't think the international community is going to make us face any consequences for war crimes. So there's just no reason for us not to just commit. It just brazenly attack civilians, attack funerals, and just really not even pretend like they think there's going to be consequences.
And the last question comes to my mind. If Donald Trump so respects only a strength from dictators he admires, but not the leaders who try to flatter him, he always thinks those who's flattering him, they are losing. They are losers and they are losing anyway. So does that mean that the world leaders, European leaders, have to be tougher with Trump?
I think it's less about, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Trump we've never seen him pick a hard fight and win. So I guess sometimes like some of his legal issues, but beyond that, we've never seen him really go toe to toe and again, face down really almost any institution here in the United States, right? He's gotten universities, companies, almost every institution here in the U.S. that claims to have some kind of values or ethic. And he simply demanded things of them or demanded they stop engaging in certain behaviors. And they've simply kind of rolled over. And the few people that have actually pushed back on him, he's actually caved fairly quickly. And so I think the European leaders, it's not so much that they need to be tough to respect him. It's that at some point they're going to realize that getting a deal with him through flattery that is so ephemeral. He changes his mind all the time, right? He's announced no less than 3 final trade deals with China, none of which have actually come to be executed. So I think at some point, everyone, European leaders, India, every country that deals with them is going to have to say, listen, there's no good deal to be made. There's no permanent deal to be made. The only strategy is going to be to simply ignore him, separate yourself from him as much as possible. And that's bad for the United States, to be clear. But at some point, you have to sit there and look and say, listen, there's no reliable deal to be made. It's like a deal with Putin at some point, right? He's behaving exactly like the people he admires. And ultimately, Putin views deals as just opportunities to exploit someone further.
Yeah, but from Ukrainian perspective, when you need support from the United States, you have to find some approach to the American president, and nothing works with him. No, as you saying, flattering will not lead you anywhere because he's going to change his mind. And for the president with such a huge ego, you may think that flattering and respect, it's the way to get through and to build a serious, relationship with the United States, with his country, and that's not true. Obviously,
you can't build a relationship with someone who doesn't have persistent beliefs or persistent policies over time. You simply can't do it, right? Because you don't know what they want to hear at any given moment. It's like me trying to reach some kind of détente with my toddler. One day she wants to read a book, 30 seconds later she wants a snack. There's no way for us to she has no fixed policy or beliefs or desires, and so you can't negotiate with her, you just sort of have to manage.
But she's
right?
a kid. She's a kid.
She is a kid, yeah. And, if you read the president's Twitter account, he also has some very toddler tantrum-like characteristics.
He's also probably not older than 14 years old.
No.
Teenager. Yeah, you're right. Thank you, Paul, for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, to hear your opinion, and I hope to see you again in our studio.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks again.
Thank you.